We are talking about education. Of course, for any country to develop, you have to talk about education, education, education. What about the current education model in Liberia? How is it? Is it good? Does it function?
It doesn't function, right?
So what is your problem?
We can have a whole show debating that, right? But the issue that we're discussing now is private sector, right? Particularly a U.S. private sector entity that's going into Liberia to now take over the education system. What are the long-term implications of that for teachers, for administrators, for educating children in a country that's, come out of 26 years of war? Now, 10 years later, we're still looking at chaos. We've got to begin to build infrastructure from the bottom up. Understand that it is not going to be private sector, external actors, coming from the U.S. private sector or elsewhere that will be the panacea, right? And so this is what why we've got to question these models. It is what is the long-term impact on not just this generation, but future generations? That's what's at stake when we have these conversations. So.
Emira, I know that you are a very imaginative, innovative, creative individual with a Harvard and Columbia University pedigree. Do you have any serious suggestions here? How can the development partners, for example, honestly, help the average African person? If you were to give some suggestions, what would those be?
Well, it would be first changing the economic model. We have put forward a neoliberal economic model that has failed for much of Africa, right? That has increased unemployment, increased inequality. We've got to begin to recognize that. And, it's amazing. We're in a U.S. campaign season, electoral season, where people are talking about alternative economic models. I think it is fundamentally that. And from that, we've got to also think about ways through which governments can be reinforced, right? It is government spending on health, on education, on infrastructure, roads, right? That builds healthy societies for the future. So we've got to create mechanisms through which governments are using their resources not for external elite interests, but for the interests of developing the country for now and into the future. Fundamentally, these are what the changes that would be needed, not only in Liberia, but throughout the continent.
Peter, you seem to be itching to jump in, Kaz.
Well, I think I agree with Emira insofar as the international community and Africa's partners shouldn't impose from the outside their preconceived notions of what will work. But I think equally we need to be reticent about imposing our own phobias, et cetera. I hear a fear of the private sector, a questioning of neoliberal models, all that. Africans have agency. They should. Liberia, I'm agnostic on what Liberia does with its educational system, but we should allow the Liberian people and their elected government to experiment in the spirit of experimentation. I think it's very telling that Emira, my dear sister, that mentions the interests of teachers before she mentions those of students. And I think that let the Liberian students and their parents and the government they've elected make these decisions, and if it doesn't work, they can switch course.
That is, of course, if, in fact, they had the opportunity to elect a government. Because in most African countries, I don't think I can give you more than 15 out of 54. People actually don't have that luxury of electing a government.
That's such a critical issue. Do people choose their leaders freely and hold those leaders accountable? Is there a political space to debate these issues that are so fundamental to the future of the country? This is what's at stake when we talk about democracy and good governance.
But I think we can agree Liberia certainly is one of those countries where there is a robust democratic system and free and fair elections.
Something close to that, correct?
We can have, again, a whole other show on that, right? I think clearly, there's a long ways to go as we move towards elections in Liberia in 2017. There's a lot to be seen in terms of will the will of the people be expressed and be accepted. There's a lot in terms of the institutions that are needed to make sure that there is a free flow of political discussion and debate throughout the country, that the majority of people are able to have their say. So much still to be seen. Let's stay tuned.
There are some individuals, in fact, on the African continent who would like to get an opportunity to have their say. Let's go to the lifeline of the show, which are the telephone callers. Good evening, Patrick from Nigeria. You're most welcome to Straight Talk Africa.
Good evening, Mr. Shaka, and good evening, our guest, Patrick Okorafor here in Anuchukwu, Nigeria.
Hugely terrific.
I want to find out from our guest, madam. Education is one of the dividends of democracy. Today in Africa, religious leaders build schools with money from the laity, that is from the people. But the tuition fees, very, very high. The poor people there cannot school. Madam, why is it so? Today, research work also have shown that education is for sale. Is it true or false? Thank you very much, Mr. Shaka, and I'm our guest in the studio.
Thank you very much. Just hold the answer. Emira, let me go to the other caller. Good evening, Emon Kanywanisa from Uganda. You're most welcome to Straight Talk Africa.
Yes, sir. How are you, Shaka, and your viewer, and all the panelists in the viewer studio?
Usually terrific. What is your question? Time is not our best ally, please.
I understand that in Africa, of course, there is a situation where you cannot pick the issue, whereby someone can actually table an issue which can actually not be defending the situation where you are living in. For instance, like the election in Uganda, you can see what had happened this. Hello?
Hello?
Hello? What had happened in Uganda, for instance, where the Colonel Dr. Kiza has won the election and has not even allowed to get out in the house where he is living, saying that the moment he gets out is going to cause a situation where people can live and understand the store.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I don't think we have an excellent line from Uganda. Emira, your reaction to the question from Patrick about education?
Yeah, Patrick, education is critical. And so I think it is important for people throughout the continent to have these debates. And I think the issue is not a critique of the private, phobia, as you say, Peter, of the private sector, but it's understanding that there's an economic model, a neoliberal model that has been put forward for Africa. And I think we've got to begin to challenge those models and understand that there is a critical role for people to play. People have that agency that we've been talking about, right? To be able to choose their futures, to be able to control their destiny. This is what people across the continent are clamoring for. So, ultimately, how do we create a space where people can determine their own future, can choose their leaders, can hold those leaders accountable, can ensure that the leaders are seeking their interests in providing services that meet their needs and not seeking the interests of outsiders, whether they're, foreign agencies, development partners, or corporations, right? I think ultimately this is the debate.
Well, unfortunately, the time happens not to be our best ally, so we cannot probably answer the second question, which of course regards to whether the Ugandan event was an election or in fact a selection. Some have in fact called it the moral equivalent of a coup. On that note, thanks to our distinguished guests, Beth Tritter, Vice President of the Department of Policy and Evaluation at the Millennium Challenge Corporation, Dr. J. Peter Pham, Director of the Africa Center of the Atlantic Council, and Emira Woods, an Associate Fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies here in Washington, D.C. Thanks to our affiliate stations, along with our viewers and listeners, we thank you for tuning in. For many of our Voice of America radio affiliates, Learning English is coming up next, and tomorrow morning is Daybreak Africa with James Bate. On behalf of the Voice of America, thanks for tuning in to Straight Talk Africa. In the meantime, get better, not bitter Africa, and please remember to keep the African hopes alive.